Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm Ryan Heckman, the CEO of Rallyday Partners, and this is the Founders Journey podcast. We'll explore the heart and soul of great founders and their journey to build the company of their dreams. You will learn about new industries and business models while discovering how to apply the founder's mindset to your everyday work and life. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Founders Journey podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Heckman from Rallyday Partners. We've got a really cool podcast today. I've been working with Dan Cremons for probably about a year now. We've been trying to reboot our strategy work here at the firm, which is kind of like when you start a painting project in your house. Now I want to paint every single room in our house. And it's actually seeped into some of the culture work that we do. Dan is a thought leader. I would say he's had two lives, one in private equity, kind of exactly what you envision. He was in private equity for roughly 12 years, I want to say. He'll give us a little bit more detail there. But the second half of his career has been all entrepreneurial, including writing two books. One is called Winning Moves, and it was written back in 2022. I would just characterize Winning Moves as being like if you could get the brain of a private equity firm into your organization, this is how you would do that. God forbid. Hopefully you left all the arrogance behind, Dan. But we make this book required reading with new CEOs in our portfolio now. And it's been actually a great game changer for us. And then more recently, you can tell us about your book, Dan, that just hit the shelves. When did it get released?
It released back in March, early March.
Name and premise.
Intelligent Equity is the title of the book. The tagline is, or the subtitle is, How Private Equity-Backed Companies Can Use AI to Supercharge Value Creation. So the premise is just that. And it's less of an inventory of use cases for private equity-backed businesses and more of a mental model for a company to PE-backed company, or frankly, a non-PE-backed company, to take and use to go from being sort of uninformed and not having a strong point of view about how can we use these new technologies to create value in our companies, to having identified a few use cases and feeling like you have some of the tools in the toolkit to go have success in deploying those use cases.
Fantastic. Well, that's timely. The firm that you created when you left Alpine Investors, which we're going to double click on here in a second, but is Accelera Partners. And there's a quote that your aim, your vision was to accelerate people powered value creation. I can't wait to dive into what you meant by that. And the work that Dan does for our portfolio companies is guiding our executive teams through broadly strategy, which includes some work on their vision, on their mission and their purpose. Dan, thank you for all the work that you've been doing. And I have been dying to have this conversation for some time. I want to dig into your career a little bit more and understand better why you left private equity and what your new purpose is, and just find out what's in your heart and talk about the way you're elevating private equity, which is nothing short of extraordinary.
Let's do it. Game on.
Where'd you grow up? Tell us how Dan Cremons grew up and sort of what you learned from your parents.
Yeah, grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio. I have a pretty remarkable and unremarkable upbringing. It's remarkable in a sense that I feel just very fortunate, but unremarkable in a sense that I grew up in a middle-class household with two loving parents and four siblings and had a good education. And I think by some standards probably lived a very average upbringing, but by, as I've gotten older and just been, I think, better exposed to the world, I've realized just how remarkable that upbringing is in light of the fact that I've had a lot that's been working in my favor. But grew up in Cincinnati, relatively big family. And can I tell you a little bit about the upbringing that I think ends up shaping some of the story later on? There's probably a few things that maybe characterized who I was growing up. One was small in stature. And I say that sort of jokingly because I was my freshman year of high school soccer stats said I was 83 pounds, and that was probably soaking wet. So I was smaller. I had a late growth spurt in late high school. But it's so interesting. Like the older in life, or the older I've gotten and the further into life I've gotten, and the more self-reflection I've done as to who I am and where I've come from, the more I realize that actually played a sort of a non-zero role in who I've become. There is a little bit of like the underdog thing. There's a little bit of the chip on the shoulder. There's a little bit of like I've had to early on I learned unconsciously to overcompensate for being small in size by working really hard. So that was a thing early on as I was small. I was a very hard worker, and I say that not braggadociously, but like I was never growing up. I don't think I was ever the smartest kid in the class, not the most intellectually gifted, but I always worked very hard. Part of that was probably some insecurity of not being the smallest kid or of being small and needing to sort of ensure that I had other things going for me. And then the third thing that ends up showing up throughout the arc of my story, but in a big way today, is I've always been very creative. And when I was in, high finance, the world of private equity, this was a value of mine and something that's just very core to who I am I felt like was suppressed for a long time. There were some ways and areas in my finance roles where I could be creative, but like the nature of the work just didn't lend itself as well to that. So anyways, back to you. There's a lot more we could talk about where I've come from, but I think just in terms of painting a picture, those are three of the defining characteristics of me in the early years.
That is just fascinating to me. I mean, my story, early days, was exactly the same. My driver's license was 4'10" and my weight was 90 pounds. And like you, as I've gotten older, I realized, particularly in a small town where I grew up, it was kind of a redneck town. You'd get your ass kicked if you didn't carry yourself in a certain way. It was a bunch of ranching and mining kids. My fathers were miners and ranchers. And at the end of the day, I just wanted people to respect me despite my size and limitations. And I tried every sport, basketball, football. I even tried wrestling, which was super embarrassing to wear that stupid singlet and the headgear and all that stuff. But
you're talking to a former wrestler, but go on.
Yeah. So I can identify with that and its impact on the rest of my life. So I think it's amazing that you're given your age and such, and given how successful you've been, that, as silly as it might sound, like it'd be like Dan Cremons, I overcame being short and small.
Woe is me. What a rough upbringing.
No, but I get it. I totally get it. And then that creativity thing that you referenced, our field of private equity definitely discourages it, at least in some ways. There's a kind of overabundance of quantitative skills that are highly valued, and painting outside the lines is highly discouraged, particularly when you're early in your career. And it's interesting that you've had an awakening that you actually have a ton of creativity inside of you. Hadn't given it permission to come out, and your organization wasn't encouraging it. Where did you go to undergrad, and did you do your MBA and that whole thing?
Yeah, I went to University of Cincinnati undergrad, state school kid.
I was going to say that's as prominent as the University of Colorado.
Yeah, right. Amazing school. I mean, the world I came from professionally in PE, you're working with people that came from all the big schools and the Ivies. And I look back on my college education with so much gratitude and fondness. I feel like at some level, wherever you go, it's just a matter of sort of what do you take from it and extract from it and make of it. And so I had a great experience. I was a part of a really cool program that was this is maybe an interesting little sidebar, but I came into college. I was not planning to go to UC. I was planning to I applied to some other schools that on the surface of it were probably like a little more prestigious than the school down the street called UC. But we had some family stuff going on at the time, some family health stuff that caused me to want to stay closer to home. And so I did that thinking, hey, I'll go there for my first year and then I'll transition, or I'll transfer somewhere after the first year. Two things happened during the first year. Number one, I loved the school. I thought it was great. And number two, there's this school or this program in the business college called the Honors Plus program, which was like 22 people. They let in 1 to 2 people at the end of the first year beyond the 22 that came into the program at the start. And I thought at the time I wanted to go into business. So being a go big or go home kind of guy, I said, hey, to the extent that I'm staying at UC after the first year, I want to get into this program. And so I worked my ass off during that first year to get into this program and got a full ride and got access to all sorts of things, which ended up opening doors that have sort of set the stage for many of the things I went and did after college. which we can unpack later. But I say all that because, like, on the surface of it, I don't know, being a state school kid from a Midwestern school isn't really that revered in the world of private equity. But like, I had an amazing experience, and I took so much from that school and that program. And again, it just taught me the lesson of like, many of these things are just what you make of it and what you take from it.
Where did you go? Where was your first job? Or did you have an internship in college? And then where was your first job?
I had a few of them. I had 3 internships. So UC is an interesting school in a sense. It's a co-op school. So you basically, every other semester, you're working full time. So in the semesters I was working full time, and I was doing extracurriculars and things in the evenings. I was very involved at UC. And then during the semesters when I was in class, I was still working. So I was probably working 25, 30 hours a week during the semesters I was in class. And so I had a few jobs. I had a job in operations management working for a small Cincinnati-based company, which was like an awesome indoctrination into an immersion into leadership at its most sort of core general management level. So that was really cool. And then I spent a tour of duty in investment research, working for a wealth management firm. And that's where I learned I really liked sort of the intellectuals of understanding companies and valuations. And I built a little bit of early investment judgment. I was still very naive at the time. But then I ended up finding this firm called Alpine, who recruited out of UC. And
come on, a New York-based private equity firm recruited out of the University of Cincinnati.
Yeah, despite their better judgment.
Tell me more about that. They definitely weren't at the University of Colorado when I was there.
There's a backstory there where the founder of Alpine, Graham, his cousin came and worked for him as an intern. This was in the early days of Alpine, when to say it was an internship program was just like 3 people sitting around a kitchen table, one of whom hired their cousin to come like do stuff. And so there was this early affiliation that was formed between UC and Alpine. And I was probably maybe the 5th or 6th hire they made out of UC.
That's incredible.
Yeah. Again, despite their better judgment of hiring it. But this is one of the things that I look back at my journey. This is probably a theme that describes a lot of my journey, but I look back and just feel like there's some quote about success is luck meeting hard work. And there's a lot of luck in how I ended up in private equity. PE generally isn't recruiting folks from Cincinnati. I think this is changing. The firms or the school has definitely done a better job of building relationships with investment banks and PE firms, but they were not recruiting out of UC at the time. And I got a lucky bounce, and I capitalized on that lucky bounce.
So your first job out of undergrad was at Alpine?
Yes.
That is unbelievable.
Yeah.
Did you go get your MBA eventually, or did you work straight through those 12 years or whatever?
Work straight through. I thought, as you imagine, I thought a lot about it, but the learning curve was so steep at Alpine. The ethos of the firm was hire young, underdeveloped people, give them a boatload of responsibility, more so than they probably deserved, and certainly more so than the rest of the world would think them capable of, and then support them. And generally in that environment, when you hire people that have some underlying attributes, the self-motivation, a sense of accountability, generally people swim, not sink in that environment, is what we found. So that was my first job. And I ended up just learning so much day in and day out that I thought the opportunity cost of taking 2 years and going and getting an MBA I just couldn't justify it. Just to give folks a sense of Alpine Investors, tell us about them today and just sort of the markers of success. And they're an amazing firm. And funny enough, when we were starting Rallyday, I didn't even know Alpine Investors even existed. And it's almost good that I didn't, because I probably would have copied everything, and it would have just been the Me Too copycat, like McDowell's in Coming to America of the right. McDonald's franchise. But now that I'm aware of them, when I read about their ethos and their values and their philosophies, boy, a lot to like. Tell us about how prominent and significant Alpine Investors is today, and then maybe tell us a little bit of how the firm started and how you grew there. Yeah. So the disclaimer here is I haven't worked there for the last, I guess it's been 4 years now, maybe 3.5, 4 years now. So there's a lot about who the firm is today that I'm fairly removed from. On the surface of it, Alpine manages, 12 billion of assets today. has grown to, I think there's 150, 200 people at the firm level. And to sort of paint the picture of the before and after, when I started there, we were maybe 8 or 9 professionals in a little shoebox of an office in downtown San Francisco, investing out of a $250 million fund at the time. I'm sorry, $125 million fund. And so the firm has grown massively. And I think if I were to give the short narrative of what bridges the before to the after, it is this Alpine ethos and strategy around people first. You go to the website, you'll see a lot around people. And the underlying belief is that at the end of the day, these businesses are nothing more than people working with other people to do stuff for people. This was sort of like a little funny way to shorthand it that an old mentor of ours taught us. And this was like one of these old former CEO guys who's just had oozing wisdom. And he said, just remember, business is nothing more than people working with other people to do stuff for people. And it was one of those things you hear it the first time and it sort of whizzes past you. And then 10 years later, as you mature a little bit, you're like, oh my gosh, I understand what he meant by that.
Well, repeat it one more time because it's good.
Business is nothing more than people working with other people to do stuff for people. People working with people, i.e. your team and employees, to do stuff, sell products or services for more people, your customers. And so this really became the underpinning of Alpine's whole philosophy, which is if we can get the people part right, the rest of it, we sort of have belief in the fact that the rest of it's going to take care of itself. And you have to do other things in private equity. You have to invest well, and you have to have systems and processes to scale up and support. So like, I don't want to discount the role that those pieces play, but at the very core, that was both the mindset and philosophy that Alpine was sort of built on. And one thing that Alpine has done really well that separates it from a lot of other firms that believe the same thing is it has operationalized that mindset at every turn. So whereas some firms just sort of put that on the slap it on the website and call it a day, Alpine has said, hey, at the end of the day, we are endeavoring to win by putting people first and working with, learning from, developing exceptional people. What do we need to build within the firm and within the portfolio to actualize that vision? There's been lots of things we could talk about around programs and systems and processes that we built we built when I was there, and they have subsequently built and scaled that have supported that. But that's been the real core of the Alpine story.
Okay, so you win a lottery ticket, University of Cincinnati.
Yeah.
You get to go to Alpine Investors, which is a unicorn by all measure. I'm assuming you got promoted like crazy. And by your 12th year, what were you doing at Alpine?
On my 12th year, I had just wrapped up a tour of duty in the portfolio. And I was, if I were to divide the 12 years just into really 2 chapters, it's not as distinct as this, but there's sort of an AD and a BC to my Alpine time. The first chapter was sort of living in a firm that was a generalist firm where everybody sort of did everything. So I was sourcing deals, I was doing deals, I was getting involved at a board level in many of those companies post-closing. I was doing internal operation stuff as we were trying to scale up Alpine. So it was the classic jack of all trades, master of none. And I wouldn't trade that experience for the world because it just helped me build breadth across the different facets of a private equity professionals toolkit. We at Alpine had a moment, and I personally had a moment that coincided with that, where the realization was, hey, we're all doing all the things, but the reality is 2 things. One, we're all good at some of those things more so than others. And number 2, this generalist jack of all trades thing doesn't really scale that well. And so what if we started to shift in the direction of specializing as professionals? I've realized long before that deal making really wasn't my jam. If I worked really hard at it, I would probably be an average deal maker at best. But where I got a lot of energy was everything that happened after we owned the companies. How do we support these leaders to be successful? How do we get the right leaders into the right roles? So that ended up setting the stage for my second chapter at Alpine, which was really marked by fund level roles supporting our portfolio companies, which they call in the business value creation or portfolio operations or sort of operating partner like roles, and jumping into the portfolio company in different turnaround and transformation situations. So I was, for the better part of, 7, 8 years, I was bouncing between Alpine and the portfolio, spending most of my time working with our portfolio companies, whether in an active management or leadership role or supporting them from a board level.
What a rich experience. I mean, a lot of us in this industry kind of skate along the surface of our companies. And when you're on the investment team, which is what you were describing, those first 6 years, that's kind of the deal. Yeah, you may get on the board or whatever, but like it's mostly skating. you actually took a plunge into several of these companies and probably learned a whole bunch those last 5, 6 years. Tell me some of the things you learned.
Well, my first operating role was in 2009. So I was new to Alpine at the time. I think I'd been there for 2 years. And I don't know if you remember, but we were in the midst of a global
It wasn't a good year. I remember that.
So we were, as many firms were at the time, we were all hands on deck trying to get our portfolio companies through the storm. Our largest portfolio company at the time was going through a major management transition. We ended up turning over most of the management team. And so 3 of us from Alpine took active, basically full-time roles with that company.
Wow.
Graham, the founder of Alpine, stepped in as CEO. One of our guys stepped in as CFO. And then I stepped in to run basically the commercial function. So sales, marketing, and then I was sort of involved in product, which I had exactly 0 qualifications. And I bring it back to this early story because this taught me something that I think I ended up getting a double dose of in future operating tours of duty, but it taught me something that you can't get or acquire without actually spending the time on the ground in these companies, which is operator empathy. Now, I'm coming from a role in 2009 where I was involved in this company from a sort of a portfolio support standpoint at Alpine. So, I was familiar with the model, familiar with some of the strategy, the business challenges. And I naively at the time thought, hey, the path to getting this company back on track from a performance standpoint is if you just change this number in the model from one thing to another, the whole model turns green. So easy peasy, right? And I'll never forget my first time on the ground in this company. We had, as some context here, this was a gaming technology company, one of our biggest markets at the time that we were banking on delivering some growth that could help us grow out of the financial sort of performance hole that we were in. Biggest market at the time was Louisiana, and Illinois was coming online too for casino gaming. And so I flew down to Louisiana to go start day one of my role as the new sales and marketing leader.
I bet they just loved you showing up.
Well, I show up in the middle of nowhere, Louisiana, at this warehouse where we were building games to go hopefully deploy into the emerging Louisiana market. And it's so embarrassing in retrospect, but I show up with, the briefcase in hand with the blazer on, the nicely pressed slacks. And I roll into this warehouse where nobody's dressed in slacks, as I'm sure you can imagine. And it was a classic case of the record scratched when I walked through the door and everybody looked over. And
I'm just picturing The Office or something like that warehouse,
Yeah, who is this knucklehead? I'm oh, hey, I'm your new boss. I'm the guy from the private equity thing in San Francisco. I learned a few things about professional etiquette in that moment. The first thing I did after I left the office that day was went to Walmart and got jeans and a t-shirt to wear to the office the next day. Nice. So I learned a little bit about meeting your audience where they are and some professional etiquette. But I also learned such a foundational lesson, which is you can't spreadsheet your way to success in these businesses. And in order to make the spreadsheets nice and green and pretty and the results happen, you actually have to get people to do shit. And getting people to do shit is hard. And it's especially hard if they don't want to do shit or they're not bought into the vision of the business. And so I learned that lesson in a very real way in my first day 3 of my first operating role. And I think if there's one thing that really kept showing up at every operating juncture, it was that just a real appreciation for the fact that making results happen in these companies is hard. And it's harder than a lot of private equity professionals understand because they have not walked a mile in those shoes.
And how long were you in that role?
Probably a year.
And did you guys create some success?
We did. We got the management team rebuilt so that we could fire ourselves. My job, very simply put, early days was we need to go sell machines so that we can avoid busting covenants, which in private equity is sort of, running into default or problems with your lenders. It was the first time I had a sizable number pinned to my back beyond the experience of selling Cutco knives door to door in high school. And I'm very proud of that. I didn't know a first thing other than what I read in books and what mentors told me. I didn't know the first thing about revenue leadership, but we just sort of scratched and clawed and gritted our way to being able to hit the number and avoid covenant default. So that was a nice early win professionally. And we ended up getting the business back on track. It was not, as these things tend to be, it was not glamorous and pretty at every turn. It was very challenging, but got the business back on track, rebuilt the team, which was sort of the top priority, as you would expect with this sort of people first ethos. And they ended up taking the business to a nice exit, probably 5 or 6 years down the road.
That's amazing. How many more gigs of that significance did you have before you left Alpine Investors? And then we're going to get into why you left and sort of what your Muse was and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I really had 3 other operating tours, ranging in duration from 6 months at the shortest to a year and a half.
And were each of those kind of combat duty style situations like in Louisiana, or were some of them different?
One was helping facilitate a leadership transition from an exiting founder. One was a turnaround situation, similar to the gaming one. And then the most recent one was Alpine bought a division of a publicly traded business. And so we needed to carve that business out, get it stood up. And so my job was to go in and help get the thing carved out and stood up.
Right.
So it was by design, sort of an 18-month role.
Interesting. When did you decide to leave, and why did you leave Alpine Investors?
Yeah, I decided to leave in 2020. So just to place ourselves, we're in the middle of 2020. COVID has set in. Many of us are going through, sort of existential midlife crises at the time. I had just May of 2020, I spun out of this tour of duty with the carve out that I mentioned. And I decided to take the summer off. Wrapping up in May, the world was sort of sideways. And I just said, hey, I've blown past some of these career turning points before where I had an opportunity to take time off, but I didn't. And I want to take some time. So I ended up convincing Alpine that I could go take a 3-month sabbatical. And over the 3 months, I learned something very important, which is it's very difficult, I think, to make clear-headed decisions when you are just in the thick of it. And it could be whatever. For me, at the time, it was a very demanding operating role. But when I just stepped out of that and gave myself space, a lot of things started to come into clear view for me. One of which was I felt, and I had been feeling this for a while, but I felt like I was sort of on a path that was growing increasingly incongruent with how I wanted to spend my time. And I'm being a little vague here, but this creativity thing is an example of that. Like I've long had a lot of creative energy. There were fewer and fewer places for me to fewer outlets in my professional life to deploy that. And that started to just catch up with me at the time. And I don't say any of this to take away from Alpine, but it's just, you know, these things from your own life, I'm sure, where you just feel like the path that you're on isn't the path that you're supposed to be on. And I felt that sort of viscerally, but I also ended up becoming more intellectually aware of why that was. And I'll tell you this quick side story that ended up becoming sort of sealing the deal for me in terms of why I went in the direction I did. I'm sitting there day 3 of my sabbatical, twiddling my thumbs, gazing at my navel. And I don't play video games or golf or anything. So like I didn't, going into it, I frankly didn't know what I was going to do for 3 months, but I'm sitting there day 3 and I said, okay, I got the whole summer. I'm going to do something I wouldn't otherwise be able to do. And I ended up convincing myself that writing a book would be a good way to use a summer and something I've wanted to do for a long time. And so I have the proverbial classic blank sheet issue where I've got the Word document pulled up and I'm like, okay, it's time to write a book. The cursor's blinking at me. I'm like, what do I have to say that is remotely worthwhile? The thought process that led me to the ultimate book was, I knew I wanted it to be about leadership. So I thought, what is one thing? I don't want to write some broad-based tome on leadership that's theoretical, but what is one leadership practice that I have used that I found to be especially effective and useful? And I thought back to this conversation I found myself having semi-regularly with people on my team, where whenever somebody on my team was either disengaged or underperforming, I learned to do something which set the stage for this book. I would pull them into my office, and because I like to run sort of a transparent, metrics-driven organization, they generally knew where they were. They didn't need me to come in and tell them that, hey, your metrics are red, because they knew that already. So I bring them into the office and say, hey, we both know where things are from a performance or engagement standpoint. I want to put that aside for this conversation and talk about you and go back to the essentials of who are you, what makes you tick, where do you most shine? What brings you a sense of energy? What brings you meaning? And so I got in the habit of, the way I would do this is draw up on the whiteboard 3 intersecting lines. And I would label those what you're great at, what brings you energy, and what brings you meaning. And if you can imagine 3 intersecting lines, the goal for all of us is to create a role and a life, frankly, that sits at the intersection of those 3 forces. Many people don't actually know the answer to those 3 questions for themselves, it turns out. And I think that's because for a lot of people, nobody's ever come along and asked them these questions. What are you great at? And what brings you energy? And what brings you meaning? So I got trained as a coach a while back. And so I would use some basic coaching skills. And and questions to draw these things out of people. And inevitably, like 9 times out of 10, when we got to the end of that conversation and helped to excavate what is it that you're great at, what brings you energy and what brings you meaning, the answer to why they were disengaged or not performing was found in the answer to those 3 questions. If you can picture 3 intersecting lines, and the goal for all of us is to be playing at the intersection of those, in most cases, when somebody's disengaged or not performing, it's because they're dots off center. They're doing work that is misaligned with one of 3 things: what they're great at, what brings them energy, and what brings them meaning. That's not all the time, but a good majority of the time, that's one of the reasons, in some cases, the dominant reason why people find themselves in that situation. So I say all this for 2 reasons. One, this is what the book became about, was, hey, let me teach people how to have this conversation that I learned to have and ended up unlocking people. Number 2, I realized in a very coincidental way, in a very serendipitous way, that these were the same 3 questions I needed to return to myself.
Mm.
So I'm sitting there writing this book, and I have this moment of clarity where it's like, oh my gosh, if I'm feeling a little bit off track, I don't know exactly what the track is that I should be getting myself onto. I'm feeling like it's probably not the one I'm on right now. But what if I just went back to the fundamentals of what is Dan great at, what brings me a sense of energy, and what brings me meaning? And would that create clarity on where I should go next? And sure enough, it created a lot of clarity, as you would expect.
And you hadn't, at that point, you hadn't told Alpine that you were leaving. It was more sabbatical at this point, or?
I'm having conversations with them in the background around what next. I think it was becoming clear to both of us that I needed some space and I probably needed to go do something else.
Yeah.
There was a growing demand at the firm for deal making, and we were sort of in a bit of a course correction back to the model where we wanted senior professionals to play a more active role in deal making. And I was pretty clear for myself that that's not something I wanted to do. And I was not known in the firm as being a guy the deal guy, which they rightly typed me. So I think it was becoming pretty clear through the course of some summertime conversations. I think it was becoming clear that I need to go do something else. So as the business plan for my business came into clearer view over the arc of that summer, I'm having conversation with Alpine about ways that we can partner on my new entrepreneurial venture, and they became an anchor client for me out of the gate. But
so Blue Flame, this book was your first, I guess, bona fide creative project that you hadn't maybe exercised those muscles in some time. How did you come up with the name of that book?
The metaphor for the book is if you can get people playing at the intersection of those 3 forces, they light up.
Yeah, you have a great quote in there. It's like, companies that are up to big stuff need employees that are on fire, or something like, or the people in the company need to be on fire.
Yeah.
I like that word.
Yeah, and the blue flame is one of the brightest burning forms of flame for reasons I couldn't explain to you now that are physics oriented. The blue flame is apparently a very hot flame. And so that was sort of you get it.
That's awesome. So wrote the book about the intersection of, generally speaking, your talent, your passion, and your purpose. As a byproduct of that, rediscovered your own, and you started Accelera Partners. Tell us what the name is intended to talk about, what you wanted to do with the platform when you started, and what you're doing now with it.
Yeah, the name was, I came up with the name because the domain was available. I'm not, as you'll tell from some of my other ventures, I'm not much of a branding or naming guy, but that was the name. But the Accelera, the word accelerate happens to have Accelera in it, and that was the play on words. But the core idea of what I'm doing, what I was doing then, what I endeavored to do then, and what I'm now doing has been the same, which is to accelerate people-powered value creation in PE-backed companies. My skill set became sort of the intersection of value creation and talent/leadership. And to make that more real, I spent a lot of time working with our portfolio companies, with companies of my own that I was leading through transition periods, helping them figure out where are we trying to take the business? How are we going to get there? What's our strategy or value creation plan? Ended up developing some of my own mental models for working through those questions with leadership teams, many of which we're working with Rallyday companies on now. So that's the value creation piece. And then what I did a lot at Alpine that we hadn't talked a lot about, but is relevant here, is I was kind of the 0 to 1 guy on a lot of our leadership and talent initiatives. I mentioned that people first was the ethos and the purpose of the the fund, but we did a lot of things to operationalize that. We built out an in-house recruiting function. We created a CEO in residence and a CEO in training program aimed at ensuring that these businesses had great CEO leadership. We created, culture programs like y'all are doing that we rolled out in our portfolio company. So we developed a playbook for what is our point of view on how to build enduring value in these companies and how do we deploy that into the portfolio. I was the 0 to 1 guy on a lot of those things. And then we ended up hiring people to scale each of those functions. So leadership and talent was always a core part of my job description. And so that's when I say the intersection of value creation and leadership/talent is working with PE-backed companies to help them figure out where are we trying to take this business? How are we going to get there? Our value creation plan. And then who do we need aboard to make all of the aforementioned happen?
And do you work for a variety of private equity clients and their portfolio companies, or how do you actually do this work?
Yeah, typically the buyer or the gatekeeper is the private equity firm. They're the ones who are bringing me in. And then I'm, in most cases, working directly with the portfolio companies. It may be helpful if I make this a bit more real to describe what I'm actually doing. There's really probably 4 or 5 service offerings as part of Accelera. I do quite a bit of organizational and leadership due diligence pre-closing, which is aimed at helping. So the private equity firm and the deal team in a lot of cases is the buyer there, and they're trying to figure out, do we have the right leadership, talent, culture, capabilities to make our investment thesis come true? So that's where organizational and leadership diligence comes in. So I do quite a bit of that work pre-closing. I do a decent amount of post-close work within the first 100 days post-acquisition, all around helping the board, the investors, and the leadership team get aligned on the questions I mentioned. Where are we trying to take this business? How are we going to get there? I.e., what's our agenda for our plan for creating value? And then who do we need aboard to make all that happen? So that's all. The first 100 days is a period where we all ought to be getting aligned on the answer to those questions. So I do that work. And then downstream of that, as you get deeper into the ownership period, there are oftentimes needs to replace leaders, bring on new leaders, develop leaders. So I have point solutions that I offer to PE firms that can help them to do all those things. So I do executive assessment to help them make key senior hires. We have a leadership development program aimed at helping PE firms and their portcos to.
We have two of our executives are doing that. Starts in May, right?
Well, we've got a cohort underway right now, and we're enrolling the second and the next 2 groups.
Okay.
So, anyways, long story short, that all of those things end up laddering up to this fundamental value proposition of helping PE-backed companies to accelerate people-powered value creation.
And you're now roughly 5 years into building out the platform.
Yep.
Before I ask you the question of what has gone well and what challenges that you've encountered that you didn't expect, which we'll get to, I think it's super cool what you're doing with Stephen Kaplan at the University of Chicago Booth School of Business. Tell us about the program that you created, another creative project for you, and what your vision for that was.
Yeah, together with my co-professor Alex Hodgkin, we're teaching a class on value creation in small business at Booth. We're in week 7 right now of our inaugural class. It's the first semester we're running this. The quick backstory is Booth has long been one of the leaders in entrepreneurship through acquisition, which is, for those not familiar, this is all about synonymous with search funds, and it's all about recently minted MBAs in most cases going out and buying a company that they can step into as CEO. So Booth has had an ETA curriculum for a long time to support students who want to go down that career path. They recognized, in part because Alex sort of helped them recognize, that a big gap in the curriculum was everything that happened after the business was bought. There's a lot of curriculum around the deal and how to source deals and find deals and evaluate deals. But when it came to, and there's some really good courses in programming at Booth on those topics, but there was a definite gap in the curriculum. The backdrop here is in today's day and age, as you know better than I do, Ryan, most of the value is created not on the buy, but on what you do with the business when you own it, and driving quote unquote value creation, which is sort of the buzzword in the space. So anyways, they recognized the need. Alex was able to get the course approved, and then he pulled me in, given I had written a book on this topic, to help him co-create the course. And we're 7 weeks into it. We're learning so much every week. We're very conscious of sort of running this course as a startup, which is, let's get feedback every week and let's just constantly iterate and tune. But the feedback from students has been very positive, certainly towards the existence of this topic. There's clearly a lot of demand for this. And we think we're putting together some unique ways to to teach into that demand.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen some of the curriculum. It's incredible. I wish it would have been a class I could have taken, in my college life. I would have probably taken it 3 times in a row just to be around that content.
Well, what you just said was a design principle for us up front, which is one of the questions Alex and I asked ourselves is when we were early in our operating days, what are the things we wish somebody would have told us about this topic of building value in these companies? And how do we use that to reverse engineer some of the curriculum?
Yeah, and very practical. What do you think are some of the ahas that the students gather? And maybe you could talk about where companies get strategy wrong in general, just for the audience that may not be private equity backed, drawing upon the philosophy of winning moves. I mean, when it comes to strategy and what you're teaching these students at the University of Chicago, what are some of the distinctions between what you're teaching and why you're teaching it versus maybe some of the greats like a Drucker or pick your guy? But like, what are some Dan Cremons kind of pearls of wisdom that are embedded in the design of the program?
There are 2 that jump to mind. There's a lot we could talk about in this area, but there are 2 especially useful ones that jump to mind. The first is mindset. The first thing that we do in this value creation planning work that you and I have been working on is we start not with the business strategy or not with the KPIs, but we start with the mindset of what is the mindset of a value creator. And that mindset, it turns out, is in a lot of cases a bit different from the way that some of these companies have been run before. We talk about this in the Booth context, just to bring it back to that environment. We talk about the distinction between the advisory mindset and the owner mindset or the value creation mindset. A lot of Booth students are coming from advisory roles where they were in investment banking or consulting or some other profession like that prior to getting their MBA, where their success was, and I'll say this a little bit in sort of a funny way, just for dramatic effect, but their success in a lot of cases was about creating the nicest deck or making their boss look good. And I'm not trying to poo-poo on advisory roles. That's the reality, I think, of a lot of junior roles in that environment. Is your job is not to ultimately make nickels clink into the bottom of the revenue bucket, but it is to create some recommendation that somebody else has to go do something with. So that is a big contrast to the value creation or ownership mindset, which is to say, at the end of the day, if you want to operate a private equity owned company or a founder owned company, at the end of the day, your success is in large part driven by how much equity value you're creating. And that's not to say there aren't other stakeholders that are important here, employees and customers and the community. But if you want to build a career working in private equity, like, you have to be really conscious of settling into that mindset of my most fundamental job is to create equity dollars. And if I don't do that, chances are I'm not going to have a job that long in PE. So I think that's one thing, is just like getting the mindset part right. And again, that may seem a little fluffy, but this is a bigger theme we could talk about in other contexts too. But the more experience I've had, and the maybe generous to label myself wise, but the wiser I have gotten over time, the more I've realized that so much of what propels us or plagues us happens at the mindset level, not the skill or the practice level.
That is wise, and that's so true. And to this end, I think you and I are doing a session with our physical therapy platform on May the 7th, I want to say.
That's right.
And I asked you to bring hats. You have them in some of your LinkedIn photos. It says value creator or something like that.
Yep.
The idea was to change the mindset of all the executives on that team from their vertical areas of expertise to, look, we're all creating value together, and that's what we're doing. And not lost on you, as it is us, is that it's value for all of stakeholders and not just shareholders. And I think that's a really important distinction that we both share. When you create a business of significance that elevates an industry, it's not just about the shareholders, but creating value for everybody.
Totally. And there's a bit of a paradox here. Where on the one hand, what you just said is what I believe in my heart as being the reason why a business exists, to create value for more stakeholders than just shareholders. On the other hand, if your chosen vocation is to lead a private equity-backed business, which many of the people that we serve at Booth are, many of the leaders that I work with outside of Booth, their job is to build a career leading PE-backed companies. Make no mistake, if you cannot create value, you will not have a job in that space. So that's not to say the other stakeholders aren't relevant, but you just need to be able to see the forest through the trees to say that at the end of the day is the most important price of admission to working in a private equity environment. You asked about ahas and just other nuggets that relate to my view on strategy. The one other thing I would say is I've long been a student of strategy, and there's a lot of people who are a lot smarter than me who have thought for an entire career about this stuff. So who am I to say that any of these other models are off base or off track? But I feel like one of the things that the strategy world gets wrong is just making this topic feel too unapproachable and lofty. McKinsey has their 19-point strategy frameworks and and so what I try to do is just take a very approachable, commonsensical approach to strategy. Now, the way I do that, again, I don't claim this is the best approach, but it's my approach, is to frame this work around questions that need to be answered and aligned upon. So the way that I describe it is if we're sitting down to do strategy or value creation planning work with one of your companies, the first thing that I say is, hey, at the end of the day, like our job here is to answer basically 5 simple questions together. And because they're simple doesn't mean they're going to be easy to answer, but it does mean they're simple. And those questions are, where are we today? This is level setting on the current realities in the business. You can't think forward until you're clear on where you are today. Where are we today? Where are we going? Where are we trying to take this thing? Which is a bit of a combo of what is the long-term vision for the business, which should supersede and outlast any single owner's ownership period? And what are the exit targets or goals for the owner? And how do we bring those two things into alignment to answer the question of where are we going together? Question 2. Question 3, how are we going to get there? And this is where the value creation plan and a lot of strategic decision-making comes in. How are we going to get there? Question number 4, what needs to happen next? Once we're clear on where we're going and how we're going to get there, the next question is, what's the next 20 yards of the journey need to look like? And that starts to bridge the strategy execution gap by saying, what are the things we need to do this year, this quarter, this month to begin to move in that direction? And the 5th question is, who do we need aboard to make all of that happen? And I believe on that piece of it, one other thing I'll say, I believe on that piece of it, nobody would dispute the importance of being clear on the people part. Everybody thinks that's important. But the reality is many companies don't have a plan that define how are we going to get the right who into the right where, focused on the right what, the right people into the right roles, focused on the right goals or priorities. And so one of the tools I use with client companies is create a people plan. It should be the peanut butter to your value creation plan's jelly, where the value creation plan says, how are we going to make this vision come true and actualize the strategy? And the people plan states in very simple terms, who do we need aboard to make that happen?
And do you also work with the client companies on development plans for the executive team who's already there? Is that part of the work?
It can be, depending on how far the private equity group or the company wants to take it. It can be. That's one of the things that would show up on a people plan is there's a series of people-related decisions that you could make in a newly acquired company. One decision is keep current person in current role. One is remove person and change person in the role, which can be a repurpose or a fire hire. The third can be repurpose. And this actually happens a lot in these companies where you have somebody in an existing role, but you realize through the course of due diligence or some of this post-close work, hey, they're not the top decile, top quartile person for that role, but they do have a skill set that could be really useful over here in this other part of the business. So let's sort of shift them over. And then one of the other decisions you could make, to your point, is to develop. We have somebody that we feel like has a lot of headroom in this role. We want to give them a boost. So what does it look like to put them through some sort of development thing that could help them to up level?
Do you find what's more often the case, right strategy, wrong people, or wrong strategy, right people?
Yeah, right strategy, wrong people. It's funny. I've had this debate more times than I care to admit around the old Jim Collins method or mindset of first who, which is to say, get the right people on the bus first and then help them, and then they're going to figure out where to take the bus. Versus what I think the prevailing mindset is in private equity, which is let's get really clear on what the strategy or the value creation agenda is first. Let's use that to inform who do we need and what roles, and do we have that today?
I totally agree, because like in the Jim Collins world, if you hired that, let's say, extraordinary executive team as your first step, you would have zero EBITDA when you were done doing that.
Yeah.
And so right there, you've got a problem. And Moreover, I'm not sure new employees, new leaders coming into a company of that size, you're probably going to go after executives that have run bigger companies or ones that you look up to. And sometimes big company people don't do well in small companies. They want reporting hierarchies that the P&L cannot afford, or it's just been so long since they've done actual work that they don't have the temperament or frankly, the skills anymore to roll up their sleeves and get the work done. And so I think that's a trap. And I like the notion of creating your strategy and then also having a people plan to fulfill that it's ratable as you grow. So you've kind of got your first, if you can only fill 5 slots, you've got like your first, second, third, fourth, and fifth in order. And as you get bigger, you can hire more talent. And in the meantime, you supplement your team with outside resources if necessary, or, whatever. But I think it's practical to say you start with strategy and then go to people. Not to mention the fact that sometimes I think our industry is guilty of looking at hard skills of people or their executive presence, their ability to make PowerPoint decks that look crisp like a McKinsey work product. And what you don't realize looking from your private equity office in San Francisco or New York or whatever is that oftentimes your impact players are sort of in a disguise. And they don't look like, they don't talk like the people that you think are adding a lot of value, but they are. And so it's really important, I think, to take the time to understand who those impact players are at various levels of the company and look internally for promotions or opportunities for people to grow versus hiring that A team that can come in and flail for a long time as they get their sea legs and earn the followership of the legacy employees and teams.
You nailed it. That was one of my favorite parts of being an operator was transitioning into a newly acquired company. And, I would read I'd read the investment memo, and we used to do a pretty cursory job of team due diligence. So there wasn't a lot in there that spoke to the capabilities of the team, but I'd come in with the surface level understanding of the business and probably a point of view that, hey, we need to make some people change to sort of get the business to the next horizon. And invariably what I found 9 times out of 10 was many of these companies have some amazing people at the lower and mid levels of the organization who have a boatload of latent potential. It's almost like the metaphor here is like a beach ball held underwater, where many of these people, like there's just a lot of potential energy that is waiting to be unleashed. And yet the ball has been held underwater, whether by, working for a less effective manager or being in a culture that really wasn't conducive to letting these people shine or whatever. There could be a variety of reasons why this happens. But that was one of my favorite parts of being an operator, was just going on the hunt for latent talent that can be just better unleashed. And as I'm saying this, there's these pictures in my mind of people sort of from my prior life flashing into my memory of some amazing people that just needed somebody to come along and say, hey, just go for it. Or, hey, what if we got you over here into this role that seems like it could better align with what you're really good at or what brings you energy?
Imagine what would have happened had you not gone to Louisiana, for example, with Graham and got thrown in the deep end of that warehouse with your suit and your blazer and all that stuff. I really wish I could have seen you walking in that warehouse. That would have been awesome.
It wasn't pretty.
The record player scratching. Let's end with some, I guess, wisdom around creativity. And one of my favorite books was written by Stephen Pressfield. There were actually 2. There was a companion to it first, and it was called The War of Art. And for those of you who don't know, Stephen Pressfield wrote The Legend of Bagger Vance. I think it's a golf book that became a famous movie with Will Smith, I believe. But he's also the only author of a book that's to this day required reading at the Naval Academy. Or I think it's West Point, actually. So he's written on topics relating to military topics as well as fiction that end up in Hollywood. But then his third rail is he talks about the creative process and just how full of disciplined true creativity is. And so the War of Art is about exercising that discipline in pursuit of a creative work. And then he wrote a companion book called Resistance, which is a book that almost celebrates those obstacles in our way that are preventing us to fulfill our creative selves. And when I think about our industry and I think about you, part of me wonders what would have happened to Dan? Where would Dan be today had he given himself permission to be more creative earlier in his career? And also, what does it feel like to you now that you can be creative all the time? I mean, do you feel more alive? Do you feel more connected? Like, what does that feel like?
I have a purpose statement, and I've had a purpose statement for 15 years. And one of the words in there is creativity. So the first thing that comes to mind is it makes me feel, when I'm being creative, it makes me feel more on purpose.
And what is your purpose statement, just out of curiosity?
With creativity, persistence, and a steadfast belief in others, I inspire myself and others to embark now on journeys of significance, create our own path to get there, and celebrate progress along the voyage. So that's like the long form version, which has a lot in it that we could unpack in another podcast. But the short form version is setting sail. That's like the little tagline that I have, right next to my desk here and sort of keep pinned to mind. And so creativity is a value that is expressed in that purpose statement. So I say that because it makes me feel, being creative makes me feel on purpose, both by the literal definition of my purpose statement, but it also just makes me feel like me. And use the word alive. I can relate to that word. And I can relate to the feeling that comes from sitting down with, I used to be very daunted by the idea of sitting down with a blank sheet of paper. And I think that was probably because of a lot of limiting beliefs and a lot of the just negative psychology around, am I going to have something that is worth other people reading? And do I have anything remotely intelligent to say? And as I was able to self-examine those and get past those, now this blinking cursor moment is like so exhilarating to me, and it makes me feel alive, like you said. Knowing that there's something that is wanting to happen, there's some sort of creative output that is wanting to happen, and then relishing the journey to figuring out what that is and how to let it loose.
Yeah, I'm also picturing that language that you used in Blue Flame around, people who are on fire. And I think what's so cool about when you're living on purpose and you feel alive, you express that with almost a flame-like power, not for the sake of the flame, but for lighting other people up. And that can become a real positively masticizing force, which is also in your purpose statement around, empowering other people to unleash their potential. And boy, you're 5 years in. I don't know how long your career will be, but it's a pretty exciting phase of your life, Dan. When I think about, since you left Alpine, you've started your own business. You've written 3 books and started a new program at the University of Chicago. That's a hell of a start. What are some of your dreams for the next 5 years?
I've always been a 5-year plan guy, and for many parts of my career, I've been a 5-year plan guy. I knew that I wanted to be a CEO of a mid-market company 5 years from now, and I sort of work backwards to create the path. But that's always been part of my mental wiring. For once in my life, I've given myself permission to not know and not have a 5-year plan. So what I don't know is where will I be in 5 years, and what will the role be, or what will what I do know is what needs to be true about where I want to be 5 years from now and what will guide me there. And I'm very clear on that. There's 3 things. I want to be doing work that I enjoy doing, that makes me feel alive and brings me a sense of purpose, where I can have impact, number 2. And number 3, with people who I want to spend time with. I've shared this with you before, but this is one of the reasons why when you and I met, it took a little while to figure out the first 2 parts of that, which is what is the work that I do that you need, that we could do to have impact. But I knew the third one. I knew it the first time I met you, which is this is just a guy I want to spend time with and work with and support in some way. And I don't know what way, shape, and form that's going to take. And I don't know if I'm going to be able to monetize that, or if I'm going to, so there's a lot I didn't know, but that was very clear to me. So I know that if I follow those 3 guiding forces, it's going to lead me in the direction of wherever I was meant to be. But I don't know. We'll see. I think creativity will continue to be a part of where I go. And then just thinking about how can I use the creative outputs, books, content, thought leadership, other thing, dabbling with creating some products right now that can serve my core business and help keep my core business cranking.
I can see the wheels turning here on the screen. I did want to share, we have a sticker that we put on all of our surfaces here at Rallyday, and it's our logo. And what does it say on the bottom?
We're in the people business. I love that.
So I do think we're brothers from different mothers, or whatever that expression is. I've always felt that way with you. And I can't believe we were also like less than 100 pounds at our first homecoming dance when we were freshmen in high school, and how messed up we've been ever since. But I really appreciate your journey, Dan. Thank you for the work that you do at our portfolio companies. I'm already seeing the impact, to use the word that you used. You made our CEO at our accounting services business, Nancy, feel alive and confident about her future and the future of her business, which she shared with me after she spent a day with you, and she is on fire. And it's a real testament to your purpose that you're influencing hundreds and hundreds of people within our portfolio, and very inspiring work. And thank you for devoting your life to it.
Thanks for saying that. And thank you you've been very gracious to listen to my story on this. Whether speaking for an hour would tell you this or not, I generally don't like talking about myself, but I want to dish it right back to you for a second and say that there were two themes that came up in this conversation around purpose and creativity. I think one of the reasons why I just felt a good vibe with you the first time we met was because I don't know if those are stated values for you, but I see creativity and purpose oozing from you.
Thank you.
It takes creativity to build the sort of firm that you're building, which is very unique in the vast landscape of private equity. And it takes a lot of purpose. And you and Rallyday, uniquely relative to a lot of other firms that I have seen and known and worked with, you're very clear on who you are and who you're aspiring to be, which is purpose. I just really appreciate that about you. And that's one of the reasons why I've been so excited to continue to work with you. So
awesome. Well, we've got a great future together. Thank you for sharing some of your wisdom with our podcast listeners. And until next time, I will see you on May the 7th in Rhode Island.
Looking forward to it.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, man.
Bye.